Hello and welcome back to Rocinnante podcast. It's the first month of 2026 and already a lot is happening. Sean P. McCarthy here with Angela Nagel. We wanted to continue our America Collapse watch with our favorite America-hating spiritual NEET. Malcom Kyeyune is back with us. He has a new article in Unheard about the ICE shooting in Minneapolis titled ICE Theatrics Are Getting Real, Riled Up Americans Are Turning Violent. We'll have a link to that article in the description, and we're going to talk about that. We'll talk a bit about Iran, Venezuela, maybe a couple other topics, but we should start with Greenland. You have to give the MAGA communists some credit. Trump does appear to be destroying the American empire. He's really kind of done more for third worldism than any third worldist that I can remember. There's an article in Fox News today based on a Trump Truth Social post. President Trump has announced the United States will impose 10% tariffs on multiple European countries unless Denmark agrees to the complete and total purchase of Greenland. Trump said that Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland have, quote, journeyed to Greenland for purposes unknown, posing a very dangerous situation for the safety, security, and survival of our planet. I think the United Kingdom sent one soldier to Greenland, the Jason Bourne guy, but they're going to get, those countries are going to get a 10% tariff, which is going to increase to a 25% tariff in June. And these tariffs will continue until a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland. Stephen Miller has been on TV saying that if you can't defend a territory, you actually don't have any legal claim to it. So there's all sorts of threats about an invasion as well. But this situation seems very confusing to me because it seems like Trump is actually destroying NATO. So we wanted to just kind of start there, Malcolm. What the hell is going on? Why are they doing this?
I mean, Trump has said it himself, like he's been asked. So, because the background here is that during the Cold War, the U.S. had upwards of 10 to 15,000 soldiers on Greenland at the height of um, hostilities with the USSR, and now it's down to 150 soldiers. And the U.S. I've talked about this in earlier episodes, but like the military is doing pretty bad. Like it can't really man a Greenland base, and it's not considered particularly important, which is why it's down to a skeleton crew, and why all of American infrastructure has been abandoned and basically left to fall apart and rot away. Um, as for minerals and so on in Greenland, like there's no American companies that have the capital or interest in sort of digging for rare earths or whatever. Um, if there were, like the treaties between the U.S. and Green or Denmark would just give a free hand to the Americans. So this entire conflict, and Trump has said it himself, it's psychologically important. That's the word that Trump used. Like it's psychologically important to him, and he then said, "Yeah, it might not be to any other president, but to me, it's important." And so he's sort of expanded on that by saying, and people inside MAGA have said that, like, well, the U.S. when the U.S. was strong, had territorial expansion, right? You had the Mexican American War, you had the frontier, and all of that stuff. So now that the US is kind of declining, what if you actually expanded again, right? Um, well, then you wouldn't really be declining anymore now, would you? So it's just kind of this conflict that is really about the psychological perception here among a certain subset of Americans. But like the thing about this conflict is, and especially like these new tariffs, what I'm seeing here in Sweden and in Europe, the closest analog to what's going on right now is the sort of the mood when the special Russians invaded Ukraine. Because at that point you had like this fervor, and people said like, okay, if you have anything positive to say about the Russians, you are a traitor and a fifth columnist. Well, people who were basically like members of the Trump fan club or whatever in Sweden, a couple of weeks ago are now saying, like, if you support the Americans in any way, you are a traitor. You are committing treason by dint of existing. And like, I'm just say your name and I will block you forever on Facebook, and like, you know, cast your family into eternal damnation. Like, it's just, you have this insane polarization going on. And what you're seeing now, I don't think it can be repaired. Like, it doesn't really matter what happens. I don't think these tariffs will stand for even 2 weeks, just given the situation with the Supreme Court. But it doesn't really matter. Like, the divorce is becoming official right now between the US and Europe.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter one of the right-wing American accounts is complaining that this is kind of having an apocalyptic effect on the far-right America puppet nationalist parties that all want to break up the European Union. He was kind of despairing that, similar to what happened in Canada, where Trump intervened and then it went to the public really turned against him. It seems like the same thing is happening in Europe right now.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And again, it's kind of interesting because what we're dealing with here is really the collapse, not just of an alliance, but basically something akin to. I mean, what we're seeing here, I've made this comparison before, but like, we are living right now in the middle of an equivalent historical process to the collapse of the USSR in the late 80s and early 90s. Um, and anyone who was lucid at that point, that which doesn't include me, I was like 2 years old, so I wasn't really very much concerned with geopolitics at that age. But the anyone who was sort of paying attention would remember that, like, there wasn't really one point in like 1989 where people said, "Oh yeah, this is the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it's gonna be the fall of the." It's going to lead to the fall of the Iron Curtain, and then NATO is going to expand, and then we're going to invade Iraq, and then in 2008 we're going to have like the rise of China, whatever. People didn't know what the fuck was going on. It's like, wow, something weird is happening in Russia. I guess there are some protests, whatever, in East Germany. I guess, like, whatever. Oh shit! Now they're sending tanks to bombard the parliament. I guess that's interesting. Uh, we're seeing something very similar now. Like, it's going to be a while until you can take a step back and then kind of say, okay, so this just happened. But the again, like the sort of collapse in transatlantic relations, I don't really think it's going to be fixable at all. Um, and again, I don't think any side really wants to fix it. Like, what you see in America is so interesting because, like, you have this dynamic that's been evident ever since, I think, the first months of the Trump administration, where Trump basically finds like a new target. Like, he starts hating on Canada. He says, like, Canada has always tried to steal from us. They have this really horrible trade agreement that some traitor to America negotiated that allows Canadians to steal from us. And then the trade agreement is CUSMA, which Trump himself negotiated and hailed as a great success. But like, he just says that, and then like, basically his hardcore base says, yeah, fuck these Canadians. We've always been at war with them. And you kind of can justify basically anything, like blowing up the Canadian car industry or whatever to protect America. But then again, whoops, turns out the Canadian car industry is just one half of this thing called the North American car industry, which is, based principally in the northern part of the United States. So you kind of have this where it's like, this George Orwell 1984, we've always been at war with East Asia kind of thing. And you get the sense that what really matters at the end of the day, what really matters is just the like this is kind of something psychologically here that is internal to the Americans themselves. As I said with Greenland, this isn't about like, can we place troops on Greenland, because the US can, but it can't afford to do so. And it's not about mining or whatever, and it's not even about like the Russians needing Greenland in order to have, like, a bit of coastline to the Arctic. Like, the Russians have coastline to the Arctic. It's called Russia. um it's just about like this sort of internal psychodrama. And this kind of ties into what we're going to talk about later, which is like this whole Minneapolis thing and like the ice raids and so on. But it's, again, like this divorce that's happening now. It's really something that, earlier I would say that the Europeans really want this alliance to hold, but now I don't think that's true anymore. Like, now that Ukraine is about to lose, and remember, like, the official reasoning for the entire Ukraine war was like, these people should be allowed to join NATO even if Russia doesn't want it. Well, now NATO basically doesn't exist anymore. So, like, what's the point of the conflict? uh, European politicians at this point, if they can say, well, this war wasn't really that great, but we might have won it if we weren't stabbed in the back by the Americans. Um, that is basically a get out of jail free card for them. So I don't really think that this political survival of someone like Ursula von der Leyen is really tied to the maintenance of the transatlantic relationship anymore. I think it's quite the opposite. I think that if that relationship collapses, people will be able to forgive Ursula von der Leyen for anything that's happened up until this point. Like,
Yeah,
I,
and yes,
I
and
would.
Merz in Germany said Russia is a European nation, and we also shouldn't have got rid of our nuclear capacities. Which was like, what it made me think of was Talleyrand, who said treason is a matter of dates.
Yeah.
The date changes, and suddenly something that you could have gone to prison for is just coming right out of his mouth, and he's just coming to his senses on everything. So, I mean, that just shows that they actually will, if that relationship is broken, they will start to be rational again, and all of this kind of bizarre, hard to understand behavior of European leaders will go away, because it
Yeah.
was only ever there because of some calculation between the two powers,
Yeah.
Russia and America.
Yeah, I've said this before, but I've maintained consistently for the last like half a year or so that, like, what you're going to see from American leaders is, or sorry, European politicians and leaders, is something very similar to, the fall of the USSR, like all of these sort of communist apparatchiks or whatever, and they just become like free market liberals or whatever, because that's the new thing. And you have kind of this year zero where the political system gets reset, and like all of the sort of insiders, they just change their tune. um and we're starting to see that now. And the thing is, I used to be fairly sort of, I had a very sort of bleak view about the possibility of any sort of rapprochement between Europe and Russia. But now I think that America is acting so crazily that, like, the the force majeure of, sorry, my dog ate my homework, or, sorry, we acted crazily, but we were controlled by these insane Americans, like, that is actually going to be accepted.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the Russians, at the end of the day, when they said, like, all of these Europeans, they're basically like, it's useless to talk to them because they're American, like, brainwashed slaves. Yeah, yeah, that's correct. But once the American empire collapses, you can actually say, yeah, well, you know, what we did when we were brainwashed slaves doesn't really apply anymore.
Malcolm, I'm curious, just on a personal level, do you like keep a list of people on the internet who call you a collapsed heart or like a Chicken Little or talk about Turbo America? And are you kind of waiting for the day that you can just have a big I told you so moment? Or
I mean, the thing is, though, as I said in the last episode, like you can't actually have an I told you so moment. Because again, how this stuff works is just that even if we had like nuclear war tomorrow and 25% of the global population died, people would just say, yeah, well, I still have to go to work. Like 75% of the population is still alive. Like you said, this would be the end of the world. Like this is just another Tuesday. So it's kind of like that. If you think about the things I've said in previous episodes, like, I predicted a war with Iran, and at the end of the day, you got a war between the US and Israel and Iran. The US played defense for most of it and burned through something like 50% of all interceptors in inventory. And now, like, the US military is basically broken. Um, I got a lot of, well, nothing happened out of that. So it's kind of like, as you said, Angela, like treason is a matter of dates. Well, collapse is also just a matter of dates. Like we're right now living through the again, like we're no longer in the sort of rising tensions chapter of the history book. We are in the actual sort of the Berlin Wall has fallen. People are trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. Stage of the USSR collapse for the global American empire, but like you still have to go to work at the end of the day.
I think
So
the Maduro thing really gave a lot of the kind of sadists, like it gave them a real shot in the arm. They were like, yeah, we can still do this. We can go in and we riddle them all with bullets and we were great and they sucked and we can take whatever we want. And, like I was saying to you guys before we started recording, it's like when they go up to Israelis with the microphone, like
yeah,
you just shouldn't let these people like have access to Twitter because the whole world is like, oh God, I mean, how do we get away from this? But the Cuban, what I also saw, they were really getting off on the sadism of that, right? Dragging him around in the handcuffs and everything, and boasting about how they riddle them all with bullets, all the Cuban guards. And then they had the Cuban cremated remains, and they were all laughing at that. And then they're all laughing at the fact that the Cuban guys in the like military fatigues were all like 100 years old, right? The guys going the whole way back. But I was thinking, these 100-year-old Cuban guys might actually live to see their dream, right? They might actually. So you really see how these kind of these regimes that have held out against all odds, just by kind of staying put and doing nothing, they're actually going to see their enemy fall.
yeah. I mean, Cuba, it's gonna come down to the wire, unfortunately, because like the sanctions have really done a number on them recently. But I mean, North Korea, I mean, these people are they're just cruising.
Yeah.
Iran, yeah, I mean, Iran is gonna be fine. Like everyone else inside the axis of evil, like they're doing pretty well. I mean, sort like Assad is in Russia playing video games or whatever, but I think he's just glad to no longer have to be like the manager of that circus. But in general, yeah, like these empires, they don't really last forever, and now like it really is kind of over for the US, because as you pointed out with Venezuela, yeah, people had this, oh yeah, the empire's back, the empire's back. Nobody's talking about that shit anymore.
It was like
It's
lasted one
completely
day.
gone. Yeah, because now it's like, you have all of these collectivos doing, setting up impromptu roadblocks, looking for Americans that they can lynch. So the State Department has said, like, if you're an American in Venezuela, you have to get out right now because otherwise you're going to be killed. And like the Maduro government is still there, and they're not really listening to orders. So all this fucking did was show that the US has no like ability to do anything. And now they're gonna have put Maduro on trial. And at this point, like what they're accusing him of is, and I'm not making this up, like after the Cartel de los Soles accusation fell apart, they're now saying that they had to intervene because Maduro was trampling on the rights of indigenous tribes by opening mines. So the US had to intervene in Venezuela to protect, to do land acknowledgements or whatever. It's just a farce. But again, like the you see people like Nick Fuentes going, yeah, we're gonna have this massive American empire. We're gonna enslave all of like like all the non-whites. Like we're gonna have hundreds of millions, but they're not gonna be citizens. They're gonna be slaves. And it's just incoherent.
Maybe, well, I mean, one thought I had was like maybe that, Trump and the people surrounding him thought this was going to be like a Louisiana Purchase moment. So if Europe gets dragged down in a conflict with Russia, they take the money for a land purchase, and then they just end up losing anyway. Something like that. But I mean, that's just a thought. I don't know if that even makes sense.
Yeah, maybe. It hasn't turned out that way, though, fortunately or unfortunately. Like, I really think that this threat of tariffs, that was really the thing that made the straw that broke the camel's back. Because again, like in Sweden, people kind of just woke up and said, like, wait, they're gonna start an economic war against us because we defended like Denmark. We said something nice about Denmark. Like at that point, people are no longer willing to play along with it. And again, like the Americans just have this deeply irrational sadism where it's like, yeah, we can do whatever we want because we have this all powerful military. And like the thing about that military is that military is a fucking joke. Sure, like the US has 70,000 like special forces members or whatever. But like if you think about something like the US Navy, due to decades of mismanagement, essentially doesn't really have much in the way of like anti-submarine warfare capabilities or whatever. So a shitty little rinky-dink country like Sweden, which has like 6 submarines or whatever, they're pretty good submarines though. I mean, we build them ourselves. But like we could sink an aircraft carrier. And in training exercises, we have done so several times. So like the US, it's really this giant and feet of clay. Yeah, you can kidnap Maduro or whatever, but you can't really go to war against a mid-tier country like Iran for more than 12 days without burning, tens of billions like in irreplaceable interceptors.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to your article in a second here, Malcolm, but it really does like that. The ICE shooting, the Maduro, it seems like government just by hype moments and aura. I think that is a good theory of what's happening here. But actually, before we get to the Venezuela thing in a little more depth, I did just want to ask you, Angela, as one of the leading EU Gaullist intellectuals, are you kind of thrilled about this whole Greenland situation because it's promoting this kind of EU integration we haven't seen before, or are you kind of filled with dread, or what are your thoughts on everything that's happening?
Well, I think that there is a bit of trauma in Europe about the idea of, like, for example, even in theory, like an American-Russian alliance or something that would leave Europeans just totally vulnerable to attack. But now that this has happened, and you immediately see both sides actually, Russian and Europeans, saying things along the lines of, Russia is a European nation, this kind of thing, which is exactly what when we were discussing de Gaulle, that was, what he was arguing, that the USSR will pass, but Russia will always be our neighbor. And now Merz is saying that. And the other side is saying that too. So that makes me less anxious than I was before, because I was sort of losing a bit of sleep over the idea of, I don't know, European capitals being nuked or something like that, like really worst case scenario happening. And yes, it absolutely is going to forge. They always thought it would be actually aggression from Russia that would forge European full unity, but now it's actually turning out to be the American kind of. It's not really aggression as such. I suppose it's more of a very surprising random betrayal, because the understanding since World War II is that Europe is totally non-sovereign, disempowered. It's got U.S. military bases all over it. It has no real sovereignty itself, but it is protected. And that's the agreement. So for the protector to suddenly just turn against the continent with, it has all these military bases and doesn't have a unified military command of its own or anything like that. All of that stuff has to happen now. And like I was saying, my fear was the gap between where it is now and where it needs to get to, which is unified military command, unified intelligence agency, and all of that stuff. But now that actually, like, what I'm hearing from Moscow is kind of not is making me less uneasy about that. I think it will happen. There's going to have to be some like concert of Europe type of agreement again.
Yeah, I mean, the war is kind of like the war in Ukraine is basically over, I think. I mean, after this, like this kind of throws. I don't see a lot of commentary about this right now because it's so like this attack from the Americans is so fresh. But like, what are we even fighting for? For Ukraine to join NATO? I mean, NATO doesn't exist past this point. Like, it might exist on paper, but I mean, you can't, after this kind of attack, you can't actually trust the Americans to, like, you can't let them anywhere near you with, like, holding a loaded gun. They're just going to use it on you. Like, you can't
Another
take your
thing
eyes off
too,
them.
you were saying about this kind of strange sadism where certain people are excited about the idea of just taking other people's stuff and we can do whatever we want by force, etc. One of the things that has kept Europe in this limbo for so long is that the Americans would always say the alternative to this vassalage is that you're all just going to get killed and raped by the Russians, and it's like, again, this World War II trauma, right?
Yeah.
That was always used, and there's still I still see people repeating that. But I mean, if both somebody like Merz and somebody like Vladimir Putin both say concert of Europe type of things, then that's just not a fear that can keep Europe from moving forward.
Yeah, and it's gonna take a while for people to sort of unlearn these reflexes. But I mean, Carney went over to China and said, yeah, we can have a trade deal with China. It's no big deal. And I think that it really isn't a big deal. Like, you have people in Sweden saying, like, what are we gonna do without these Americans? Like, we're gonna be invaded by China. And it's like, my brother in Christ, like, it was 10,000 years ago that the ice sheet covering all of Sweden retreated, and people, made permanent homes here in Sweden. In those 10,000 years, China has not invaded Sweden even a single time. Like, we're perfectly safe. They're living on the other side of the fucking planet. Like, we don't really have any sort of like grounds for conflict. And the funny thing there is, a year, I think it was like 1 year before the invasion of the special military operation in Ukraine, the current like right wing government um, had just sort of won the election, and in their first year in power, the Swedish armed forces, they publish like an annual report on these like security situation in the world. And for the first time in basically forever, Russia was no longer identified as the big threat to Sweden. The big military threat had been redefined to be China. Like this was in 2020 or 2021, whatever. And people were like, wait, what? But this was just a sort of uh, uh, um, like a paid assignment from the Americans, because the Americans at that time under Biden were like gearing up for this economic warfare with China. And so we as good little servants, we had to say that, oh yeah, like China is the biggest threat to Sweden's national like security and sort of integrity of our borders and so on. All of this shit is just like it's being beamed out from Washington, like so much of the reflexes people have. And without that programming in the background, there really aren't any sort of natural incentives for people in a country like Sweden to actually care about what China is doing on some like reef or whatever that's contested between China and fucking Laos or something. Like, yeah, that's a really interesting thing if you happen to live in the neighborhood. We don't. And so I think that, to make a long story short, I think that a couple of years into this new thing, the mental horizons of everyone is going to change quite a bit, and I don't really think that the sort of the conflict between like a lot of European countries and like especially Germany. I don't necessarily think that like the conflict between Germany and Russia is going to have a lot of staying power without American interference or intervention, rather.
Hmm. Well, I wanted to actually, before we get to Venezuela, I just wanted to mention, you mentioned the Canadian thing. I just want to get both your thoughts on that very quickly because it's interesting to me. So, Prime Minister Mark Carney, he goes to Beijing. The Canadians in China, they have a new deal. China's going to buy Canadian canola oil, also known as seed oil. So, just extra triggering for every right winger on X. But what I thought was very important about this is Canadians are going to theoretically get visa-free travel to China. But most importantly, this China deal is Canada has 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Those tariffs are going to come down to 6%. And I think a large part of what kind of keeps the American populace, let's say, passive is they think China is still, everyone there is like extremely poor and living in mud huts. And they don't really realize that Chinese electric vehicles are better than American electric vehicles and could be available here for half the price. So, I mean, it just seems like once you have Chinese BYDs going down the streets of Toronto that cost half of what a car in America costs and is so much better, it seems like it might become more and more difficult to pull the wool over the eyes of the American people as to the success of the Chinese economic system. But of course, you know, the Funk Edits, Hype Moments, and Aura geopolitical analysts on X just say that we're going to annex Canada and kill everybody. So this will not be a problem. But yeah, I was just curious if you two had any brief thoughts on the Canada situation.
I was just thinking, if there is, we were talking earlier about this idea that like there isn't an exact moment where you say, "Oh, the empire is done now," or "This country has collapsed." You know what I mean? It's often just like historians look back and kind of project a moment onto it. But I think in the case of America, I think the current, the American global empire really will be officially over when Ursula von der Leyen or some representative of the EU does what Carney just did. Like when there is like an official agreement of something like that, because the EU is often referred to as the world's largest single market. So actually, in a way, consumption is kind of its power. And China is incredibly productive. So like that actually will be, there's no possible way that will be the Chinese century just beginning, like at that moment.
Yeah, and to add what you just said, word on the grapevine is that this latest sort of tariff announcement by Trump on Truth Social is now convinced like the EU to abandon the trade deal with the US, because we had a trade deal to get to end the trade war that Trump started, and now he's broken that. So like, I don't really think there's much of a basis for finding a new agreement, because like the trade agreement we had was pretty unfavorable to Europe, but Ursula von der Leyen and so on sort of forced it through, because like what else were we gonna do? Like, we have to keep the peace in order to pursue this war with Ukraine. But now Trump has shown that like you can't actually have any sort of agreements at all. They're just going to be broken. So I don't really think there's going to be any new kind of agreement whatsoever, because like it's just going to be broken 5 minutes later. So the moment of Ursula von der Leyen going again to Beijing and actually being received by like the premier or whatever, instead of being treated like a fucking dog like she was last time, I think that moment is coming a lot closer.
Well, so to talk about Venezuela, so on January 3rd, as people know, Nicolas Maduro was captured by U.S. Special Forces, Delta Force. As we mentioned, 50 Venezuelan soldiers were killed, another 32 Cubans were killed. And, I just, on a personal level, I have a lot of admiration for Hugo Chavez, and in both him and Nicolas Maduro. These are brave individuals. These are people who stared down the most powerful empire in the world, never sold out, and just kind of the reaction, the sadism we were talking about. It reminds me, if you've seen Dune 2, of the arena on the Harkonnen planet where these brave warriors are taken and a bunch of fat spectators cheer at their deaths. I mean, it's kind of a perfect metaphor for these people on X and the other sites. Who just kind of they never leave their houses, and they're so excited to cheer at the deaths or the overthrows of some of the bravest individuals who've lived lives that they could never even imagine. But so the actual situation in Venezuela, as I understand it right now, Delcy Rodriguez is the interim president. The Bolivarian revolution is still in power. But it seems like they're just going to kind of pay off Trump to go away. And so my understanding of this is that the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, he traveled to Venezuela at Caracas. He met with Delcy Rodriguez. That was the same day that Maria Machado, the so-called opposition leader, was at the White House and gave Trump her Nobel Peace Prize for no benefit at all. But from my understanding is that the U.S. has completed its first sale of Venezuelan oil for $500 million US. Trump says Venezuela, they'll hand over between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil, about $2 billion worth. The funds from this $500 million sale are being stashed in various Qatari banks to be kept out of reach of Venezuelan creditors and kind of reduce transparency about the whole thing. So it's not clear how much the money is going to Venezuela, how much is going to the U.S., but I found an article in Reuters that said from this $500 million sale, Venezuelan banks have been notified they'll receive about $300 million. So about 60% will go to Venezuela. The other 40%, we don't know exactly, but it seems very clearly like they're using Qatari banks to set up a slush fund for Trump personally. And this seems like the accommodation that they've reached, where the Venezuelan government will be allowed to kind of continue existing as it was. They just have to pay a bribe to Trump and his associates through a Qatari slush fund. So that's my current reading on the situation. But what do you two think? Do you think differently?
No, I agree. I think it's this. There really isn't much of a plan in terms of. I mean, you saw this with the way in which, after they did this operation, they asked the oil companies if anyone wanted to invest, and everyone said like, "No, we can't." Like the break-even point for like pumping oil from these fields is like $80 a barrel. It's like $57 or something now. And also, like U.S. foreign policy could change through a fucking tweet in the middle of the night. Like we can't invest under those circumstances. And then Trump hears that and says, "Oh well, ExxonMobil said Venezuela is uninvestable, so I won't let them invest because they're being too cute." Like, wow, what a punishment! But there really isn't much of a plan other than aura farming and hype moments. And I do think that what you said here about like a slush fund in Qatar or whatever, this is kind of part and parcel of the breakdown of the US political system. Because a lot of the activities that Trump are focusing on are things that basically circumvent the constitutional sort of division of powers and try to focus as much power in the executive. Like the reason tariffs are such an obsession is because you could, in theory, just have a revenue stream that's outside of Congress's control. If you think about the lead up to the English Civil War, this is basically what triggers the Civil War, which is the English Parliament have the power of the purse, and they generally only want to give that power of the purse to King Charles if he agrees to a bunch of concessions, and they feel that like Charles is kind of a weak king, so they can basically squeeze even more concessions out of him. And he refuses, and so he turns to all of these irregular ways of raising revenue, like this institution called ship money, for example, where you can in the threat, like if the England goes to war, you're supposed to be able, as the king, because you're like the military sort of commander in chief, you are supposed to be able to go to coastal communities and say, well, we're going to need to pay for ships to fight the Spanish Armada, so we have this one-time tax. And so King Charles just starts doing that, but there's no war, and he does it to communities that aren't coastal. So he's just basically instituting what is de facto a recurring tax on everyone. And these kinds of tensions eventually produce the Civil War. Well, I mean, it's kind of the same thing with all of these schemes to build up like slush funds or tariff funds that Trump can do whatever he wants to do with outside of like the congressional appropriations process. So I don't think these things have a long half-life. They're not really part of some master plan to build like the new American empire or whatever. Like these are kind of like all you're seeing. Like if you detonate a nuclear bomb, you get all of these weird sort of isotopes that don't exist in nature and can only exist for like 30 minutes because like they decay so quickly into other isotopes that are like more stable. I think that what you're seeing in Venezuela is basically like one of these, like it's the equivalent to a 30-minute isotope, but instead of a nuclear bomb, it's an empire blowing up.
I mean, the one bit of it all that is kind of logical, there's a case to be made that it is logical, is anticipating the end of the Ukraine war and some kind of agreement, alliance, concert of Europe type of situation between Russia and Europe, that the breakup of the empire is inevitable, and therefore You just need to secure everything that is geographically nearest to you. So, I mean, that's logical enough in terms of Greenland, because why bother trying to maintain a relationship with these NATO countries when you're going to break up anyway? And then you don't want ideologically hostile, nations in Latin America. That does kind of have a logic to it, right? Securing that which is nearest to you and just anticipating that Europe is going to, NATO is going to dissolve and the empire is going to dissolve.
I feel bad for Israel. They spent so many years creating all these right-wing parties in Europe, and now they're just never going to get another vote again.
I know. I saw some Zionists saying like, "Oh, this is so damaging to Yoram Hazony's national populism project."
Oh no! How terrible!
Yes. Actually, this is slightly going back to the previous topic, but I think it's very interesting how, just a little while ago when I was kind of trying to make my case for why the full unification of Europe needs to happen, I was saying that the right-wing parties in Europe are just, they're like foreign-backed secessionists, basically. They're not really, right, because it's not a full union yet, but the logic is similar in that they are, I mean, Bannon just openly said it, like, we're going to have puppet MAGA-like parties, and we're going to get them into power, and they'll, they'll break up the union or weaken it to a point that it will be, will not be able to consolidate power in any way. And of course, the whole basis of American power is is unification. It's the union. And the same goes for Europe, same goes for any continent. And now that's actually just really obvious. I remember when I first started saying this, even on this show, I kind of had to really like argue with the audience and stuff about it. But now it's like, okay, Bannon has openly said that's what you're there to do. You're there to be foreign-backed secessionists who will be like MAGA copies. And your intellectual guide is Yoram Hazony.
Yeah.
And so it's so obvious now.
Those people have real fucking issues. Like, they're being, here in Sweden at least, those kinds of people are being rapidly denounced as fifth columnists and traitors.
Great. My work here is done.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because, like, we kind of have this remnant of like pro-Trump people still in Sweden. I mean, they're being, rounded up and sent away to the camps, like, but like they really have an interesting like psychology to them. But where it's like, I guess if I wanted to be sort of steelman them, I would say it like the structure of the argument is basically like, I don't have a girlfriend because of feminism and cultural Marxism. You know who fights against feminism and cultural Marxism? The Americans and Donald Trump. It's all one struggle. Like, it's not about borders. It's about like these big sort of cultural, like the clash of civilizations or whatever. And so, like, even if Trump like annexes a bunch of sovereign European territory, like, he is doing it in the fight against the globalists.
The fight against the roasties.
Yeah. It's really like these people, like, they're a lot of the time, like, it's real vintage stuff. It's like the vaccines and Fauci, like Anthony Fauci. Like, we have to talk about him. And it's like, yeah, dude, your brain got fried like a couple of years ago. But like, this is kind of the mode they're in. Like, it's very little about like actual sort of like national interests or whatever. It really kind of is sort of a derivative of like this whole Q slop thing. where again you kind of personalize these things as well. We have a bunch of like George Soros or whatever. Like we have to fight against George Soros, and Trump is fighting against George Soros. He needs Greenland in order to defeat George Soros. But this thing really doesn't have much of a future. But basically, I guess you could say that the Americans created kind of this environment, which they themselves are, interestingly enough, tearing down. But like you had this kind of like tin pot, like insane soft power. Like if you think about something like what's that thing they shut down? USAID. Like USAID is soft power for liberals. Like, okay, we hand out condoms in Africa. We give microloans to like Nepalese peasants, whatever the fuck. But you had kind of USAID, but for insane right wing, like basically like kooks and madmen, where it's like we're all together in the fight against Soros and like the trans people. But now they're like it's the fraternity of the people, like the vaccine skeptics.
Oh, there's another one too. Like what they're trying to do is that polarization reaction thing. It's some kind of a bastardized version of Schmidt, right? Friend enemy distinction.
Yeah.
And they know that if there are certain triggers that's on bad team, and if they can just associate bad team with whatever. So one of the things I notice them doing is I find them. One of the government Twitter accounts, the State Department, I can't remember which one it is always posting this like Nazi allusions. And so then these are designed so that liberals will go, oh my God, if you translate this to German, it's what Hitler said, right? And then they go, oh, look at this libtard calling everything Hitler. They're trying to just have this really basic friend enemy Pavlovian kind of response thing going on. But of course, what I like about what has been happening over the last couple of like week or so is that actually it's not really working. Like I've seen a few people doing the oh my God, this is like Hitler thing, like a few liberals kind of falling for that, but like for example, they did an actual like national strategy document and a bunch of speeches and stuff basically saying, oh, we love European civilization so much and we are just worried about its demographic future. And it's like, and people just looked it up and were like, wait a minute, this doesn't even make sense. Like, if you look at like in terms of not just overall population but birth rates, like America is much more post-white, right? Like this is not even close. And so it's like, what are you even talking about? Or they would go, oh my God, you can't even walk down the street in France. It's like a Islamic caliphate or something. And people just were able to easily point out that this doesn't even make sense. Before that, it was the free speech thing, right? And then people were able to work out, oh wait, but Elon Musk has these personal business interests in stopping these European regulations, et cetera, et cetera. So actually, they're obviously not very good because they're not even able to come up with like durable, plausible narratives in order to stoke the friend-enemy distinction. If you compare that to something like the Cold War, right, where the hatred and fear of communism and that kind of two sides endured for decades. These people can't even come up with a plausible narrative that is not debunked in a matter of days.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought it up because you kind of put the finger on what I was sort of aiming towards, where it's like, yeah, you have these kind of friend enemy, like these Schmittianisms, which are you see people who say, well, the Muslims are taking over or whatever. Like they can be kind of again, this was kind of Yoram Hassone's big project. If you think about the earliest, um, the earliest big sort of meetings of the national conservative movement. Like, I know the people from Sweden that went there, like Paulina Neuding. Like, she is part of the right. She talked a lot about like Islam and so on. And I think that, without putting too fine a point on it, she shares an ethnicity with Hassoni, and I think a similar interest in protecting the interests of Israel. Let's just put it that way. And so, like, you had this kind of big transnational alliance to protect Israel, which kind of is falling apart. They can still call upon like the Muslims are the real problem, but again, Trump is smashing this too, because having these fucking American mutts walk up to you and say, well, we need Greenland because the Muslims are gonna take over in 10 years. It's like, fuck off. Like, we don't really need to hear, like, in a country like Denmark that's 85% white or whatever, we don't need some fucking 51% white, mystery meat guy coming and talking about, we have to take your stuff because you're not white enough. Like, get the fuck out of here. So it really, like, that's not an attractive sell even to the counter jihadis in Denmark. Like, they're not gonna listen to something like that.
I have something related to what you're both talking about. This is a tweet that I sent to Angela, which got a bruh reaction. And I was happy. I didn't even know Angela knew about bruh moments, but so this is, I mean, it was pretty shocking to me. I'm just going to read it here. So this is from Undersecretary of State Sarah B. Rogers, the official X account for the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy. But so she's, giving some tweet about Germany let all the Muslims in, mass migration stuff. And so there is a reply from an account called National Socialists of TikTok, who says to her, Jews let the Browns in. And then she quote tweets it, and I'm quoting now from an official U.S. government State Department account. Quote, Germany infamously retains very few Jews, yet imported barbarian rapist hordes. As an American, I'm allowed to call them that under Merkel. Even today, Germany suppresses political opposition to point this out. You guys will say this is because of, quote, Jewish NGO tentacles, or why that Hitler, who destroyed his country, is treated too harshly by history. You'll say this because you're dumb trash who prefer to promote conspiracy theories rather than ascribe Germans or anyone else agency over their country's future. And I mean, maybe it sounds lib to say, to kind of comment on how far we've fallen, but I just cannot imagine that this is an actual U.S. State Department public diplomacy account saying this kind of poll debate, posting like a JIDF guy on poll on the political board on 4chan.
Yeah, I mean, like all of these structures that were built up to, I mean, Yoram Hassouni was over here in Sweden. I never talked to him, but some of the people in the Sweden Democrats were like, he was trying to build like these connections to kind of create this kind of post-liberal Europe where everyone would be like nationalist and so on, but they would still support Israel. Like, but the best laid plans of mice and men, right? Like, all of this has kind of fallen apart just due to the way in which the breakdown of the American empire has happened. So the Sweden Democrats, which were, the guys who invited Hassouni, they are now very sort of belligerent towards the Americans, you could say. Like, they were among the first, and they've taken the hardest line and like, okay, we can't deal with this fucking bullshit. Like, we have to stand up to this tyrant and bandit in the White House, which is kind of funny because they were trying to basically ingrate themselves with the Americans earlier. Though I guess for various reasons, like they were more in favor of Biden because Biden was, friendlier towards Ukraine. But again, like they are trying really hard to be like pro-Israel, which is another one of these kind of dilemmas where you I don't really see much of a future for like a strong pro-Israeli position that's like super anti-American. Like that doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, even when
Yeah.
I saw some of the people doing the whole, oh, women's rights, they're taking off their hijabs, where is the left, that whole thing. It was like really, there weren't that many. They couldn't even muster like anyone who wasn't actually an Israeli. Like they couldn't get anyone to go. Like there used to be like a, Christopher Hitchens kind of type of person who could lend some kind of intellectual weight to this thing. But now it's just sort of, it may not seem like we're very enlightened, right? Like we're having an enlightenment right now, but in some ways we are actually more quick to get to the truth. And that's why these narratives are so unstable, because they're fake, and so they can be very easily overturned. And so, I saw, for example, Peter Hitchens just saying, okay, but like we overthrew Mossadegh, who was a secular developmentalist, because he tried to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian oil company. So this entire bullshit Islam narrative is just takes like 5 seconds to just do a, to figure out why it doesn't make any sense. And the only people who were, as I said, were either literally Israelis who were actually mad that people weren't going along with their Islam, we must all fight Islam thing. And then like a few very old people who, started like spiked people and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, but younger people, like they just can't accept this argument. It's too obviously false, and it's too easy to just have someone point out a basic fact that just immediately debunks the whole thing.
Yeah, let's just talk about Iran briefly, and then we'll talk about Malcolm's article. So, as people probably know, there were these large protests against the government of Iran starting at the end of December, continuing for weeks. They seem to have petered out now. According to the Financial Times, there were black clothing-clad athletic men engaged in arson and property destruction, and going down the streets, urging people to leave their house, get on the streets, protest. So, certainly in Iran, inflation and cost of living concerns are real, but it does seem like these protests were egged on probably by Israeli or other agents. Allegedly, thousands dead in the crackdown on these protests. We don't really know. CBS News under Barry Weiss reported 20,000 dead, which is, of course, ridiculous, but we don't actually know how many people have died. And then Trump seemed to have gone back and forth. There was another Polymarket insider trade thing where some, whale came in and bet that there would be strikes on Iran and then sold their position once a bunch of idiots saw that Polymarket said there's going to be strikes on Iran because of an insider says so. Trump says that he backed down, or he decided not to do the strikes. Allegedly, this is because U.S. military assets were all near Venezuela, and Trump was warned about the retaliation by Iran. And then Trump seems to have been going back and forth on, like, originally he said it was good that Iran made a decision not to hang 800 people, which I don't think they were going to do, but Trump said that was a good decision. And now in Politico Today, Trump is saying that it's, quote, time to look for new leadership in Iran. The usual Hezbollah accounts are saying Trump betrayed the Iranians and the protesters and got them all killed by backing off airstrikes after urging them to rise up. But I think honestly, I think the situation is kind of the same where what we've been talking about. And my personal read and guess on all this is that Israel, this is sort of their last chance to pull the U.S. into a war against Iran. Iran knows that they have time on their side. So I think we are still in a situation where we're headed towards an apocalyptic war against Iran and U.S. military assets will start moving into place. But of course, I hope that is not the case. But Malcolm, what is your read on what is going on with Iran right now?
I mean, the basic problem here is that the U.S. burned through some 25% of all the TADs, the terminal high altitude area defense interceptor missiles. 25% of all of them that had been ordered. And that is actually something like 40% of all of the TAD missiles that like physically exist. Because obviously you put in an order before the thing is delivered. And so you allocate money in advance of the actual physical production. So 12 days of the US playing defense, not for its own installations throughout the Middle East, which are spread out over the entire Middle East, by the way, but just for a really small area like the size of New Jersey, called Israel. 12 days of that basically ate up some maybe 50% of the interceptor capability the US had. And everyone kind of knows that, okay, you can go for another 12 days, maybe, if you're going to defend Israel again. But if you have to defend, Prince Sultan Air Base and Al Udeid and Israel and a bunch of bases in Iraq and a bunch of bases in Syria, that is completely impossible. Like you won't, the batteries you have can't really cover anything. Like most bases, like they're lucky if they have like one Patriot battery or whatever. So, I mean, I explained these things to my mom before we started recording. But like you have to understand that the US, it's kind of like a lion, right? Like you have the same dynamics. So a lion keeps hold of his flock by chasing away all the younger sort of challengers. And a lot of the time you can chase them away just by appearing strong, through intimidation. The US still has like a really impressive sort of mane, but it basically has like late stage leukemia or like bone marrow cancer or something. The US can maybe go for a couple of days in a conflict with Iran before Iranian missiles really start causing casualties, blowing up planes on the runway, causing casualties among soldiers and so on. This does not necessarily have to be a huge problem, right? Like, I mean, hundreds of thousands of Americans died in World War II, and the US had a much smaller population back then. But the US can't absorb any casualties whatsoever. It can only fight wars by appearing completely invincible. Because the moment you lose, okay, well, we lost a couple of hundred soldiers in a week. I mean, a couple of hundred soldiers in a week, for any normal country, like, who the fuck cares? But for the US, a couple of hundred soldiers in a week, that would be like empire ending. Because, like, okay, so how long is this going to last? Is it going to last for 10 weeks? That's a couple of thousand. Is it going to last for 100 weeks? I mean, that's 20,000 or whatever. Like, the US can't really absorb losses. It can't really replenish equipment that gets broken and so on. And
So they're very reliant then on those these small operations, like really rapid operations. Yeah.
Like the entire way in which Iran has been discussed now is basically Trump wanted some sort of airstrike or whatever that would, be instantaneous. It wouldn't be a campaign. And it would basically collapse the entire Iranian government. And then it would make sure that, like, what remained of Iran, like, it wouldn't destroy any missile launchers or whatever, or at least not that many of them. But through some sort of artifice, the remaining 99.5% of the Iranian military wouldn't actually fire at the Americans after the Americans attacked Iran. And he asked for, well, give me a solution that just wins the war instantly and prevents them from shooting back at us, because we can't defend if they start shooting at us. And people said, we don't really think that method exists. And I mean, obviously it doesn't. Like if the US actually sort of saddle up and try to, institute a draft or whatever and went to war against Iran, yeah, sure, it would take like 5 years or whatever. I think the US could win. But obviously, the US wouldn't really last as a country for more than a couple of weeks before you had some sort of internal revolution, because the country is just in a really terrible state. So a lot of this maneuvering you see, where it's like, will she, won't she? Like, will we attack, won't we attack? A lot of it, like, it's not some sort of super secret evil plan for world domination. It's just like the calculus is about, can we maintain the appearance of invincibility? And the way that the US has done this has been basically entering the war without between Iran and Israel without saying it has entered the war, just playing defense, and then doing all of these like pagantry, like these LARPs of strikes, where it's like they call the Iranians and say, "Well, we would like to attack you. Is Tuesday fine?" And the Iranians say, "Oh, sorry, Tuesday isn't really ideal for us. We could maybe do an attack on Sunday." And then it's like, okay, can we use the missiles or the bombs? Like, no, only missiles this time. Sorry. And then it's like, okay, well, which base do we get to attack? So we have a retaliation. And the US said, well, you can't really attack Prince Sultan because it would be inconvenient to move the planes. So it's better if you attack Al Udeid, like we'll evacuate it, like so nobody gets hurt. And they're like, okay, yeah. So you attack us on Tuesday, we attack you on Thursday. And you have like this sort of simulacrum of a war where both sides, and particularly the Americans, can say, like, we won this. Like, we would have destroyed the other side if we weren't like being held back. That's what the maneuvering is about. It's not about like actual sort of a military calculus here. And
another thing that could happen too, next, because it's sort of like every day something huge is happening at this point. When you wake up, you're kind of like, oh my God, what will, when I look at the news, what will have happened? And I was thinking, Ben Hodges, who's the former U.S. Army in Europe, like a general or something like that. I can't remember exactly what his position was. He's like saying things like, are military leaders considering whether an order to seize Greenland would be unlawful? Article of the Constitution says treaties like Washington Treaty are law of the land. So that's like, I don't think you can actually, I think it would be literally an act of treason for him to say you should disobey orders. But that's basically what he's saying there. I don't know how else to interpret what he's saying. So I mean, that something like that could happen, or if you think about it, like I think one of the things we discussed when we started this podcast was like the possibility of some kind of like a mutiny, or that if anything major was going to change, it was going to be through the army.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely the most likely thing now. As in, if somebody actually removes Trump or brings about some very radical change of direction, it probably will come from the military.
Yeah, I mean, there's three vectors for which the US military can basically cause a regime collapse. It's a mutiny with regards to Greenland. It's a mutiny with regards to Trump calling the Insurrection Act and, sending in the military to arrest all the Dems and cancel the midterms. And like an attack on Iran, because the thing about an attack on Iran is you have to do all of this. You have to call Tehran and say, can we attack this empty base on Tuesday? Is Tuesday fine for you? Because if you don't have a deal, they're going to shoot you back with missiles without telling you beforehand. And then a bunch of Americans are going to start dying. Every Iranian attack on US bases has basically been pre-coordinated with the Americans. And there was one kind of semi-exception where like they actually coordinated with the Americans, but like the base commander forgot about some troops. And those people, like, they did not have a nice time. Like, nobody died, but there were a lot of, and that was kind of a miracle in and of itself. But there were a lot of like traumatic brain injuries and like serious injuries. If you don't have a deal and you attack the Iranians, a bunch of Americans are going to die in very short order, and a bunch of planes are going to get destroyed, and so on. And just to give people sort of an idea about how rotten the military structure is, like the most common strategic bomber the US has is the B-52. This is a fucking like 73-year-old plane in terms of design. The airframes are like 60 years old or whatever. Like Nixon had to cancel Operation Linebacker 2 because the Vietnamese were shooting down too many of these planes, during the Vietnam War. And there was no production line for them in the 60s. It had already been closed down. So these are like ancient artifacts. And in theory, the US has like 70 of them, but only 50 are even like in theory or like officially even supposed to be working. The rest are just like scrap. And out of these 50 that in theory can work, you have maybe 25 to 30 that are actually in like a mission capable state at any one time. 30 planes. You know how many flying fortresses, B-17s, that the US produced during World War II? 13,000. And that's only one model of bomber. It's not even the most commonly produced one, which is like the B-22, I think, which is almost 20,000. So we've gone from, the US producing like 60,000 bombers during a couple of years, like 5 years, down to the US has 30 bombers against a country of 90 million, 30 bombers. I mean, there are some like, they have maybe 8 B-2 like stealth bombers that still work and so on. But it's like, you can't do some sort of industrial warfare with like less than 50 like strategic bombers. You can't. Mm-hmm. So it's just wrestling. Like it's just these like fake. And the thing is, and the US is capable of being so desperate, like Trump is so capable of being so desperate that he falls for the K-phobia here and he attacks Iran. And at that point, like you are going to get some sort of mutiny pretty quickly because there will be no plan to win against Iran. And like Americans will start dying for nothing. And the American military is in a terrible state. Like morale is really low. And you can, if you want to know more about that, you can read the new book called The Fort Bragg Cartel, which goes through just how fucked things are inside the U.S. Army.
Actually, I have a question about that for you, Malcolm. I interviewed Seth Harp, the author of the Fort Bragg Cartel, a couple months ago on this podcast. And something I asked him, so we were talking about a military mutiny or a coup or whatever the case may be. And of course, in my wish casting fantasy, I would love the idea that there's an American Hugo Chavez out there. There's some lieutenant colonel that's going to, implement debt cancellations and loan forgiveness and this sort of thing after having a coup. But I guess from the outside, realistically, looking at JSOC, at Delta Force, this operation in Venezuela. Again, I'm not an expert, but from the outside, it looks like this special forces is kind of the more competent and capable, impressive part of the U.S. military that can kind of still do these operations. So, I asked Seth Harp if he thought there might be a possibility of some sort of military coup from JSOC, from the special forces, from these people thinking, oh, we don't want to take orders anymore. We might as well just start giving them. And he basically believes they're getting a pretty good deal. They don't have any reason to upset the apple cart there. But I'm just curious, both your thoughts on generally, are the special forces kind of the exception to the decline of the American military, and if or where you think a coup or a mutiny might come from?
I think they're not really an exception to the decline as so much as they're a driver of the decline in a lot of ways. And I don't think Seth Harp would have a problem with this point. Like, what these special forces do is that they hog all the resources, and they're not really, like, special forces are not really liked inside like the rest of the military. And the closer you are to special forces, the more you really despise them. So if you're like an army, like 11 Bravo, like an infantryman in Afghanistan or whatever, like, these special forces are like a threat to life and limb, like, because they're basically Rambo, and they do a lot of stupid shit that lead to a lot of problems. So, I mean, he's right in that they're getting a very good deal, and that good deal is kind of dependent on like the hollowing out of the rest of the US military in a lot of ways. And the cult of the operator is kind of toxic also in like a political sense or a cultural sense. But in general, I do think that the role of the US military, you're not going to have, for very obvious structural reasons. Like, you can't really use, like, if you wanted to use the special forces to sort of maintain order in the US, the only way they would be able to do that is the way they maintained order in Afghanistan, which is kick down a door in the middle of the night and shoot everyone, like dad, mom, children, dog, just execute them. That's not a really good way to do counterinsurgency in Afghanistan. It's a super not good way to do counterinsurgency inside, the continental United States, where there's 700 million guns for 350 million people. Like, you kind of don't want to do that. And I don't really think there's much interest, and there's like the internal culture of the military in the US is not set up to, do the Hugo Chavez thing of, taking responsibility for the health of the republic or whatever. Like, that goes against everything that the officer class is taught. Like, the thing that the officers inside the US military pride themselves on is that they are detached from politics. So if things go to shit, like, these people are going to be like stickers for, well, we're not supposed to get ourselves involved in this because that would destroy the republic. So they're going to be pretty passive, I think. What you're going to see is, I mean, the latest news is that Waltz, the governor of Minnesota, just activated the National Guard. I don't know what they're really going to do, but like the end of the day, I think you're going to see a fracturing of the US into, from the federal government being like the principal political actor, the states are going to take over as like the real drivers of politics. And at that point, you're going to see a fragmentation of the military, and particularly like the National Guard.
Well, I guess we should talk, about the domestic aspect of this collapse and about your article, Malcolm. Again, this is in Unheard. It's called Ice Theatrics Are Getting Real. Riled up Americans are turning violent. We'll have a link in the description. But so, of course, people should know this story. But January 7th, a 37-year-old mother of three named Renee Good was shot 3 times and killed by an ICE agent while she was in her car. You can argue about the video. I think it's clear that she's trying to drive away, not run the agent over. But what I thought was pretty dark in terms of, we've had this discussion about America being in pre-revolutionary times. Initially, the rhetoric online was entirely about, she was trying to drive over and kill this ICE agent. And I was very disturbed to see this shift in rhetoric towards, she's a lesbian with pronouns, she, her pronouns in her bio, and she was driving around filming ICE agents. So that's justification for her death. This kind of shift towards like, if you're on the other tribe, you deserve to die. But I have other thoughts, but maybe you could just give us a capsule of your article, what your arguments, what your takeaways were.
I mean, my basic point was just that, wrestling is kind of interesting because it's, you have this wrestling terminology where you have the fantasy or the fake sort of storyline, which is called a work. And you're kind of working the audience here by getting them involved in like these rivalries and so on. So it's like the battle of the billionaires between Trump and Vince McMahon, for example. But then you have, as Hulk Hogan said, like sometimes you work yourself into a shoot, and a shoot is wrestling terminology for when the real intrudes, like where you're doing this fake game, but then like people take it seriously for whatever reason. And the thing about the my basic argument is just that if you think about like immigration, for example, if you really wanted to do like mass deportations and like a structural change, you wouldn't really arrest immigrants even. You would start arresting Americans and putting them in jail for like 10 years. Arrest every meat packing plant owner who has like an illegal working for them. Say, well, you had an illegal working for you. That's 2 years in jail. Sorry, dude. Once you do that, very few people will dare to actually employ these people. But the Republican Party has always been the party of people who employ illegal immigrants and people who want less illegal immigrants. And, traditionally, what this has produced is a politics where it's like heavy on the rhetoric and then there's no follow through. But Trump has kind of changed the paradigm in the sense that like there's still no follow through in terms of like actual deportations, but there is kind of a follow through in you get like this ICE drama instead, where they go to Minnesota. Like Minnesota does not have a lot of problems with like it's not the best destination state for like illegal immigration. And like the Somalis that people complain about are legal immigrants. But again, like it's a libtard state. In fact, it might be the most libtarded state because it's home to like the American Lenin, Will Stansel, and his old Honda or whatever that car is that he's driving around chasing these
the
ICE
Fit,
agents.
Yeah.
I mean, when I see a Lenin, I see a Mao, I see a Castro, as someone said. But I mean, all props to Comrade Stansel. Like he has really he has risen to the moment, we can say. But yeah, it's a libtard state, and again, like you have this psychodrama where it's like it's the same thing that's happening to Europe, where you kind of have this, I don't really care, I just want people to suffer.
It's interesting. Like I always try to avoid giving it. I always try to argue against the idea that all politics are sexual politics or that kind of thing. But you do see this psychosexual element to it, where people will be like, they'll post Renee Good's photo and say, "I've been condescended to by women who look like this thousands of times." And there's a New York Times article about the New York Times has finally discovered the term "awful," which stands for affluent white female urban liberal, or the acronym "awful." And so there's this kind of idea that white liberal women are the ones doing the mass migration. So we have to, literally what they're implying is we have to like kill the ant queen. We have to hunt down these white liberal women because that's the only way to stop mass migration. But no, I thought your argument there, Malcolm, was very accurate in terms of they can't really mess up the coalition, but the KFAB seems to have convinced enough people, and just kind of the sexual resentment of let's go kill some liberal white women seems to have got a third of the country riled up enough.
It really is kind of this weird resentment-driven thing, and part of it is probably sexual. Like, you had people posting on Twitter, like, they posted a picture of her and said, like, "I've had so many white teachers, giving me bad grades or whatever." And like, dude, deal with your own fucking problems, please.
Yeah.
But
it's almost like
Angela,
saying...
you need to leave the country. It's open season on you now.
Yeah.
I know. No, but it's almost like being proud to be just led around by the nose. Remember what I was saying earlier about the like sort of Pavlovian response or whatever, right? Like, bad thing. Look at the bad thing. It's like they're actually proud to just not even be able to present an argument, but just be like, this thing kind of vaguely reminds me of this other thing. And so that's going to be the basis of my entire worldview.
Yeah.
It's incredible, but I guess, but that's kind of all they have at this point. Like, that's all. It's sort of like, okay, this immigration thing is all theater. We could easily change the pattern of immigration if we dealt with the employers, but we're going to have this theater, and you can join ICE with no training and feel like you're doing something based, and the only people who are going to have a problem with it are the bad people that remind you of the bad thing. And like, that's the extent of it. There's no plan. Like, for example, if, let's just say, right, a typical Democrat gets into power next. Let's say America doesn't fall apart in a total way, right? And you have normal elections, right? Like, they're just going to change the immigration back to what it was before, and it's going to reverse all of this in like 1 week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, having to actually frog march every individual person is insane. It doesn't make any sense. It absolutely is theater.
Yeah,
and like I say, it would be reversed in 1 week. So, yeah.
There's also the aspect of like the shooter himself, which is, you had people saying like, we have to kill this white libtard woman because she's the ant queen. Like, it's her that's destroying the white race. Okay, well, newsflash, the guy that shot her has a mail order bride from like Cambodia or something.
The Philippines.
Yeah, the Philippines. He has,
he's doing chain migration.
Yeah. He's a race mixer doing chain migration from the Philippines.
But we're owning the libs by killing white mothers now, is what the white nationalists are saying.
We're defending the white race by sticking up for this guy who is literally engaged in a project of chain migration. And it's like...
And don't forget, we're defending the white race by marrying a woman from the Philippines and killing a white woman and taking orders from Israel and attacking Europe.
Yeah,
right.
Again,
it's sort of hilarious if you just put it all together.
Yeah, but that's why you have this. I don't really care anymore. I just want people to suffer.
Yeah.
I've had people from like the MAGA coalition just say like, this is what drives me. Like, not even in a sort of, well, this is what you really mean, isn't it? Like, they will come out unsolicited and tell you, I don't really care anymore. I stopped caring during COVID. Now I just want people to suffer.
Yeah.
So
God.
the
Now,
thing
now I just
is,
want to kill the white liberal women who made me put my desk down and my head down on my desk in third grade. That's my political project.
I
look,
even saw one of them trying to weave this like based argument for why we should all marry women from the Philippines.
yeah,
And you know, like they're always like, the whole thing is like, how can I come up with a based reason to just like do, you know, like how can I come up with a based sounding reason to just be like a mindless slave of like a completely Zionist government?
yeah, and it really is kind of. I've seen several examples. I think I might have talked about this in an earlier episode, but it's like during the Doge thing, where they're going after like patent examiners or whatever. And the moment like the Lord of the Flies says you are an enemy, like your friends will turn on you in a second. Doesn't matter if you voted for Trump 3 times. Doesn't matter if you're part of, USPDO, which doesn't cost anything and in fact adds money to the federal budget. Like you are an enemy of the state, or like the Lord of the Flies has decreed that you must be sacrificed. And people just take out their daggers and stab you. Like it really is this kind of nihilism. It's the same thing with Epstein. Like, Trump can go after someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who used to be like the number one sort of future of the Trump coalition, like the most loyal, um, like Bolshevik in the party. And now she is basically like they're sending death threats to her son, all of that stuff. It really is just this. I mean, I've had a pretty bleak view about the future of Sweden, for example, like historically, but I kind of realized in hindsight that this was very naive, because if you had something like that shooting, and this has happened at like, the police have shot people mistakenly in Sweden. It has happened. But it's unimaginable. You could shoot the most annoying, like, Green Party libtard in Sweden's history, and no person on the right would have this, like, sadistic, orgasmic, like, masturbatory pleasure from watching the video of her dying over and over again. Like, that's sick.
Right. They're calling her George Foyd.
Yeah.
Foyd
Oh,
is, of course, the
God.
new term for women.
Yeah, like
Uh,
like people say like it's terrible that she died, and we have to do something to avoid having our fellow countrymen dying. That's what happens in a normal country, but in America you have people on both sides who just go, "I wish more people would die."
Yeah. No, I mean, it is like what you're saying, Angela, where they seem to be just happy about being fooled, where, depending on opinion polls, it seems like about 2/3 of the country is horrified by the shooting and about 1/3 is like, this is awesome. But as you're saying in your article, Malcolm, in my head, in my naive head, I assumed these kind of anti-mass migration people had some sort of consistent actual investment in the issue and would realize, oh, there's no crackdown happening on the business side. But no, we want hype moments and aura. We
Yeah.
want to kill liberal white women because of nihilism. So, I mean, it is a little scary to see, a third of the country is apparently just motivated by nihilism and personal resentment.
Yeah, I mean, I almost said to that guy Martyr Made, like, congrats on becoming Angela Nagel 2.0.
Of the right.
Yeah. Somewhat less, erudite Angela Nagel, like because I mean, what he is going through, that guy, because he's like one of the few people saying it's bad that like this mom died. We shouldn't enjoy seeing our fellow countrymen die, and it's bad that this her 6-year-old son is now an orphan.
Sounds like an anti-white libcuck, if I've ever heard one.
That's exactly what they're saying. They're basically denouncing that guy as a communist infiltrator now.
If you don't want to kill white women, you are an anti-white libcuck.
I mean, I've said a lot of bad things about the left. I mean, we all have here in this. Like, let he who hasn't, complained about the American left cast the first stone. But I'm just gonna go out and say that, like, it could get worse. It can get worse than the left in like 2016, 2017, because the right today is even more stupid, even more engaged in these like circular firing squads than the people going after you for like your article about immigration and sort of class interests and so on.
I think what's similar about it is, because I was thinking that too, and then I thought maybe it's just because the lefts are not like visible anymore so much that I've kind of forgotten. It's like absence makes the heart grow fonder or whatever. I've forgotten how annoying they used to be. Yeah. But I think the similarity is that to them back then and the way the right wing is now is like they actually are in an echo chamber and they don't realize what they sound like.
Yeah.
Even things like, it's a small thing, but like they talk about how people look all day long.
Yeah.
Like these are grown men.
Yeah.
And it's like, I went to an all girls school and women have never been this obsessed with looks as these guys are. It's just bizarre. They're like nitpicking like every little detail of like people's eyebrows and like, oh, this woman has aged, this kind of thing. Like, so, like, I don't know, they can't hear themselves or something.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when you were cancelled, and I got cancelled in much the same way for fairly similar reasons. Like, I also wrote an article about immigration, though in Swedish, and that kind of kicked off the same hornet's nest a couple of years before Trump came to power and sort of made that go national, so to speak. But like the thing is, maybe as you say, like it's kind of like this sort of absence makes the heart grow fonder. Maybe it's just like I've forgotten how bad these people were. But when I recall that, like how the left used to act, there was a lot of cruelty, like this kind of Lord of the Flies dynamic. But there is kind of a central difference here, which is, the saying, right? That hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. And when the left was cruel, like it was cruel in a kind of hypocritical way. Like if you pointed out, like, what are you doing here? Like they would at least pause for a millisecond and like have to come up with a rationalization for why they're acting in this way, why it's okay, right? The right today doesn't have that. It's like if you point out like this is evil, they will say, yeah, being evil owns. It's really great that Epstein like raped these 12-year-olds because like they weren't strong enough to fight back.
Right.
Like,
God, the Cognitionism is the worst.
Yeah, like it's kind of, and I think that like that is in a way, like if you're a psychopath for real, you're not gonna be sort of vice signaling, which is what's going on the right, where it's like they kind of force each other to be even more sort of asocial and like nihilistic and so on. Like that is kind of it's related to like the virtue signaling the left used to do, but it's like a mutated and much more malign form of it. So in some ways, like damning here with faint praise, but I do think the left was less destructive in the end. Like or at least there was a limit to how far it could go, and that limit is kind of gone now.
Yeah, because also, I mean, to be cynical, like a lot of these, when I look back at a lot of the people who are like that, they wanted a career in journalism or some kind of a high status career. And basically, when they realized this wasn't happening, they just vanished. But that may be ignoble or whatever, or not noble, or something like that. But it's still not like going to destroy the world, right? Whereas, like, I think that the difference is that the right wing doesn't even have, like, a lot of the people doing this don't even really have that. They really just want to torch everything and want to see people suffer. And maybe even like, if you explained, like, none of what you're doing, none of this even makes sense. Like, for example, the example I gave about the race thing, right? Where they were basically trying to, they were trying to stoke race, like, violence in Europe in order to destabilize Europe. That's what they were actually doing.
Yeah.
Because it hits people in a very, core way when you say you're being invaded, right? It's sort of like, it triggers, a violent response in people. And they were actually trying to do that in order to destabilize Europe. But anyway, if you, even if you point out that the numbers and stuff don't even make sense with the narrative, they're just like, okay, but I still want to kill that bitch in the car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I think's fascinating to me and just really horrifying is you'll see even some of these right-wing accounts that are having kids now, they'll talk about, oh yeah, I would commit so many genocides in Africa to protect my children and not even think twice about it. And it's just like, you want to scream at these people where, like, okay, you love your kids, that's what you're saying here, but if you love them, don't you want them to grow up in a pro-social, high-trust society where it's just like their entire conception of the world, like they can't even conceptualize that they are part of the world outside of their immediate selves. So they're like, yeah, let's just kill everybody I don't like, and that's to protect my children, without thinking about, yeah, my children actually have to exist in a world where you've just killed a whole bunch of people and destabilized everything and, destroyed any remnants of a high trust society, any remnants of a pro-social society.
Yeah, I remember I think in the previous episode we were talking about how many of the way they comment on things suggests that they just think, hey, what if we just kill everyone and take their stuff?
Yeah.
Like that nobody's ever thought of this
nobody's
before.
Thought of that in all of human history. You geniuses. This is what Silicon Valley money has brought us. These fucking engineers who just suddenly started thinking about social issues and believe that nobody has ever thought about just killing everybody and taking their stuff.
Yeah.
Right, or if there might be an actual statecraft rationale to the things that the libs that they hate do. Right, like why? So they're like, equality is for suckers and weak people. We should just have inequality, right? It's like, okay, but that leads to instability, and then your country falls apart. Like they literally just don't understand. They're like Elon Musk, right? Where if you say Elon Musk is an idiot, they'll all jump on you and go, oh, but look, he's a brilliant engineer and he's done all these great things, like Starlink, which turned out really good in Iran.
Right.
But you're like, okay, I understand he made his money on like a digital toll booth, which isn't very impressive. But like the things that he says are unbelievably dumb, and they are the words of somebody who simply does not understand, who has not thought of the possibility that these complicated, these complicated processes that require all kinds of frustrating, time-consuming, rituals and things like that all of these things are not just there for no reason. Like, why is every government in the world engaging in this stuff if it's just totally pointless? And their attitude really does seem to be like, libs are dumb, so everything they do must be pointless and dumb. We can just get rid of that, and we can just invade whoever we want and kill whoever we want, and it will all work out fine.
Yeah. I mean, the issue here is that, like, how Americans act right now. I mean, the Greeks, they would look at this and say, okay, well, this is a textbook example of hubris. Like, this is the literal definition of hubris. This is you putting yourself on the same level as the gods, and the gods are very jealous creatures. So the moment that you try to say, well, I'm immortal or I'm all powerful, the gods will say, sorry, brody, you're a human being. You don't get to say that. And they will smite you and, destroy everything you have. Like, you see this stuff where it's like Canada has this trade deal and the Americans, blow a gasket and just say, yeah, we're going to annex you and we're going to enslave all Canadians. And it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, you could.
Some more pro-white policies, killing everyone in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, you could, but like, okay, then you're going to have to pay for that shit, and you're going to have like some sort of insurgency or nationalist movement that you have to pay for. And then you're going to invade Greenland and you're going to get the same problem there. And you're going to, Germany is going to cancel the lease on Ramstein and you're going to have to invade Germany and occupy Germany. And France is going to do the same thing. You're going to have to invade France as well, I guess, while, fighting back Venezuela and Russia and Iran and China. Like, it's no, you don't have infinite power. I'm sorry.
And of course, what Carney has done just showed, like, well, actually, there is another power in the world now, and if you're being, abused, you can just trade with China.
Yeah.
Like, how is America going to stop Canada from doing that? Or Europe or anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean,
like every single enemy they make can now just turn around and do what he did.
Yeah, and they don't. America no longer has any friends. I mean, Israel isn't a friend. Israel is an overlord, and America is a vassal here. But in terms of friends, like, sorry, Europe is on the way out the door. Like, there are structural reasons for why a divorce now makes sense, because the prime directive of European politicians is self-preservation, and they need a fall guy for the complete mismanagement of the European economy and like the Ukraine war. And for Ursula von der Leyen, she has a choice. She can go up there and say, blame me, it's my fault. Or she can go up there and say, blame the Americans, they stabbed us in the back. They blew up Nord Stream.
They made us go to war in Ukraine.
Yeah. Like, it's the Americans' fault. It's not, okay, maybe I was tricked. Maybe I was naive. But so was everyone else. Nobody in Europe could have predicted that the Americans would stab us in the back this way. So you can't really be mad at me. And you know what the fuck? Like, I'll just go ahead and fucking say that. If Ursula von der Leyen said that to me, I'd say, yeah, fine. I couldn't have predicted this either, to be completely honest. And I'm the biggest doomer on the continent. So I guess we can let bygones be bygones. I would be willing to say that. And I think everyone else would too. So if you try to save this relationship, that just means you can no longer blame the Americans. And it's like, where's the fun in that for someone like von der Leyen or Friedrich Merz or anyone? I think just structurally, like once these divorce papers have been filed, there's not going to be any takebacks. And I mean, they're being signed as we speak. So Mark Carney was the first, but I think like the Australians are going to be next. And once the Australians do it or the Japanese do it, I think the Europeans will say, okay, well, we better get in on this too.
Oh, and you know what? I think the final kick in the teeth is probably going to be, there'll probably be a King David Hotel moment, right?
Yeah.
Where the Israelis go, oh shit, this empire is fucked. Time to, I don't know what that will be. It won't be exactly like that, blowing up a hotel or whatever, but it's going to be like something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think they can just sort of ratchet up the intimidation internally in America until things just explode. Like that just makes more sense in the short term than trying to convince fucking China to bankroll like the genocide of the Palestinians or whatever. Like there's not much in it for them. And the way that the region has kind of evolved politically, like you have Turkey and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia basically entering into some sort of balancing coalition against Israel already. And like the people aren't really interested in a fight against Iran anymore, especially seeing as like Israel's only interest with Iran is basically breaking it up and creating a new Syria. Because that will weaken not just Iran, but every neighbor as well, because they'll have to deal with like insane jihadis and so on. And like, there's nothing in it for any state that isn't Israel. Like other states in the region are not revisionist. Like they aren't really interested in expanding their borders or sort of conquering other nations wholesale or like genociding or expelling the population. Like it's only Israel that's interested in the sort of chaos that would make that possible. So, I mean, Israel really only has America, and it's gonna like the disconnect between what Americans want and what like Israel needs is gonna keep growing stronger. And I guess that kind of awkwardly sort of fits into your issue here, which I have found incredibly amusing, like the whole um, free speech university thing that didn't turn out so well.
The University of Austin. Yeah, Angela, I believe you wanted to talk a bit about Barry Weiss's university had some sort of meltdown.
Yeah, I mean, the details are kind of long to go into. Michael Lind had Michael Lind had an issue with the fact that Joseph Lonsdale, is that his name?
Yeah, is a billionaire. He's one of the co-founders of Palantir.
Palantir, yeah.
Joe Lonsdale.
Joe Lonsdale. Okay, so Joe Lonsdale was like, we're not going to have any communists, any leftists, any Islamists, and so Michael Lind was like, well, what counts as a communist here? Because like you're kind of you seem to be saying, I think he said something like anything to the left of Ayn Rand is like communist. And of course, the same guy, the Palantir guy, said, oh yeah, we founded Palantir to kill communists. So, and they're always going on about killing people, right? Alex Karp was saying similar stuff, right? He was getting all excited about getting to kill people. And it's unclear whether the people who are going to be killed are going to be at home or abroad, right? Anyway, so my main thought on it is that I was a postgrad when the Great Awakening sort of landed, right? Like I remember when everyone suddenly started like repeating the same phrases, like repeating bits of woke dogma and stuff. Like people who had been relatively normal beforehand just started like in a very weird Stepford Wives type of way, just like robotically repeating these phrases. And I remember how like that ideology just spread across everything. So even, for example, like I remember to get a grant for a for like a PhD program or something like that in Ireland, this was they put a clause on it where you had to explain how it would advance the cause of feminism. And this is totally absurd because like this is the generic form that was given out to people across all disciplines.
Yeah. At the University of Washington, at University of Austin, you have to explain how it'll advance white nationalism to kill white liberal women in their cars.
Yeah. So, so anyway, my point was just that I remember how bad that was, right? And I remember just getting, to the end of a PhD and like as a very, left-wing person. Like, I was like ticked most boxes of this stuff, but just like, so even for me, I was thinking, just because I have like basic kind of Enlightenment values, I guess, that truth is the pursuit of truth is the whole point of what we're supposed to be doing in there. I realized, fuck, I mean, this institution is just ruined. And everyone who isn't going to be completely on board, dogmatic, like theocrat, because I do like wokeness was like a failed attempt to create a kind of theocracy. And maybe it was an attempt even to create like a hardline American imperial theocracy to kind of hold on to what the empire had or something like that. But that was the nature of it. It was all about the idea that universities and media and all of these humanities institutions must be rapidly reformed through purges, so that doctrine is strictly in line, and these Enlightenment principles go out the window. So now, right? So then these institutions are ruined, and it kind of sucked to get to the end of like all these years of study and then realize, oh, I can't even do anything with this because these institutions are extremely hostile to any kind of to those values. And they, if you believe in the pursuit of truth as like one of the highest callings or whatever, being in a university is simply incompatible with that. That is one of the things that occurred during that decade of kind of mania, and it's a terrible loss, and it's just awful beyond words. But then look at what but like they're not able to come up with an alternative. Like the system is so corrupt that the only alternative that they can set up, they because it's set up by Barry Weiss and its purpose is to advance Zionism. Like those people, like Barry Weiss, these kind of like Zionist activists, they see America falling apart. They see all of these institutions falling apart, but they simply cannot think or do anything that isn't totally insular and tribal and selfish. Like, so in other words, there is nobody in America right now who has enough money to do things like this, who actually cares about truth or any higher virtue like that, to create an institution, a real Enlightenment university. And of course, I think, Jefferson, that was Jefferson's whole vision, right? An Enlightenment university which would establish reason over doctrine. And here we are all this time later, and it's all gone. We don't have it. It's still an unrealized dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say Joe Lonsdale, this Palantir co-founder who basically did a purge or said that anybody who's a communist or socialist needs to quit. And he defines communist or socialist as people who quote unquote hate the rich. And Michael Lind is, just kind of a New Deal liberal is how he describes himself. And for these billionaire people, quote unquote hating the rich, being a quote unquote communist or socialist, I mean, it's just, if you want to increase their taxes by 0.75%, that's the definition here. So it's this kind of completely selfish society that's destroying itself, that you can't even have like an FDR or an LBJ or a Kennedy type of intellectual anymore, because that's now considered communism and socialism.
I guess the interesting thing here is just that what you were talking about earlier, Angela, kind of ties into the thing I've been working on. You read the essay, but it's like you have this kind of overarching ideology that is, I mean, my thesis for a while has been that the European or the Western self-conception that we don't really have like a religious society or a Christian society, whatever, anymore. Like we've transcended that into a time of like nihilism and rationalism. Like that was never really true. Like we kind of had this state religion that was didn't really speak its own name, and the the breakdown of that religion, especially after October 7th, has just created this huge black hole. Like there is really no ability to fill it in with anything else. And again, like the if you think about the what's happened to like a lot of like Holocaust memorials or museums, like there was this huge controversy in the Los Angeles Holocaust Museum where they put out this statement where they said that like never again means like never again for anyone, right? And they were forced to take that down just because like people like Jews, Israelis got so mad at it. And so they said, okay, well, never again. I guess that just means for, Jews, Israelis. But once you do that, like, there's no point in having like a Holocaust memorial or a museum at all anymore if there's like no ideology, no story, no sort of belief system underpinning it. And so it's watching these institutions like that university basically being like these Jenga towers where you take out all of the pieces near the bottom and you expect them to still stand. There is kind of like this process of just destroying pretty much every institution or draining it of value that's been ongoing here.
Yeah, just briefly, we didn't even mention, but there was a recent report that the IRS can no longer audit most private equity firms, most hedge funds. I mean, and that seems to me like that was the whole point of Doge, is like they're just destroying the state. Like it can't even collect taxes anymore.
What's because I saw you sharing that. I think you might have sent it to me. Why can't they do that? What's their
layoffs at the IRS? And because Biden actually did hire several thousand more IRS employees, and Trump doged and fired them all, and is very adamant about not hiring the kind of financial auditors that the IRS actually needs to go after, multi-billion-dollar firms.
Yeah, it's the same like everywhere. Like USPTO, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, a lot of people were fired or forced into retirement, and like a lot of institutional knowledge was destroyed. Like the state is being undermined thoroughly at this point, and it really is kind of it's like an allergy or whatever, where the immune system of the body basically attacks the body itself. You kind of have something very similar with all of these institutions, really. Like these universities that are started with some sort of like, we're not going to be woke anymore. Okay, yeah, that's an admirable goal in theory, and then you end up with like these circular firing squads very quickly. And again, like all of the problems. What really fascinated me with like the University of Austin thing was like they even had they built this entire like constitutional system to avoid Title IX, sexual harassment stuff. And then the moment they actually had to use it, they threw it all in the trash and just had like a Title IX process, but like even worse than the libtards version, like with even less protections. And it's like, this doesn't really have anything to do with Israel, in theory at least, right? but still there is just this generalized sort of decay of the 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 values, or like the attention span required to have like a working institution or a working society in general.
Yeah, I mean, actually, yeah, it just kind of it goes into everything we've been saying here, where they don't really understand how a society actually works, how you actually control a society. So they all they can't really conceptualize outside of themselves. They all think like soft power is gay libtard shit that doesn't exist, and you can just kill everybody and take everything. They don't seem to understand that effective propaganda has to have it has to actually be the majority truth. You can't just say if you want to redistribute anything. If you want the median homeowner or home buyer to be less than 59 years old, you can't just call that communism and socialism. You have to have some sort of carrot for people. Otherwise, just everything is going to fall apart. And they just think, no, we're powerful. We can just kill everybody and hit them with the stick, and they're all going to get in line. And you are starting to see these cracks that, no, it just doesn't actually work that way. Alan Dulles and the kind of, the people that they think are all liberal secret communists, they actually had a pretty good idea of a compatible left, an anti-Soviet left. Just like you have to, if your propaganda is going to work, if you're going to hold the society together, you have to identify your enemies and then bring in people who are who might disagree with you about taxing the rich and all that, but actually do kind of hold the line on who your real enemies are. You can't just make enemies of fucking everybody, which seems to be what they are doing. But anyways, so this did come out pretty long, but this just kind of the problem of there being so much going on is you can't really talk about current events without going on a while. But I'm very happy with this conversation. So thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Angela. Malcolm,
thanks.
We will have the link for your article there in the description. Your article with Unheard. But is there anything else you wanted to say to the people while you're here?
No, I guess. I mean, I only have a question for you, though. Are you returning to the old country to escape the collapse of America, Sean?
No, I do. I do have my my Irish passport. So
that's good.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like on some level, maybe I will chicken out once the actual rubber meets the road. But I kind of think, oh, I should, go down with the ship. I should stay here and try to fight. So I will try to avoid fleeing.
I don't know about that. I mean, look, you have to return as the battle.
But yes, so you, the listener, we hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for being with us. If you want to support Angela and I on Patreon, or if you want to get the premium episodes and support us and help us keep doing the show, we do have a Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rocinante-pod, ROCINANTEPOD. You can get the bonus episodes and support us for $4 a month. And you can also, alternatively, or both, you can subscribe to Angela Nagel's Substack, angelanagel.substack.com. You'll get her wonderful writing as well as the premium episodes there. And me, myself, I do have a Substack as well, seanpmccarthy.substack.com, SeanPMCCARTHY.substack.com. And I'm going to have an article about, on the 19th here, it'll be Martin Luther King Day in America. I'm going to have an article about the Martin Luther King assassination. There was a civil trial in Memphis, Tennessee in 1999 that established that the actual murder of Martin Luther King was organized by members of the Memphis Police Department. And that's what the civil trial established. This is what Coretta Scott King, his widow, said at the time. They're the ones who brought the trial. And so I will have a Substack up that will kind of go through that, the actual conspiracy to kill Martin Luther King, and make my usual complaints about, let's say, the left or progressive media about how kind of little this is discussed. King was turned against the Vietnam War. He launched the Poor People's Campaign. He was encouraging the poor in America to join the Poor People's Campaign to occupy Washington, D.C. Instead of going to Vietnam, occupy Washington, D.C. and just stay there until Congress passed an economic Bill of Rights, until they dealt with poverty. And he was killed within a year of launching all that. So So yeah, SeanPMcCarthy.substack.com if you would like to read that. But until then, thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Angela, for this great conversation. And thank you so much for being with us. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Vengan a ver vuesas mercedes el retablo de la libertad de Melisendra, que es una de las cosas más de